for having me. I'm looking forward to the ride in, I guess, a few short weeks time, or I guess we're less than 4 weeks now. So I hope everybody's been on their bikes, getting ready. Has anybody hit 100K on a ride this year yet? Or she has? Yeah, so we've got some prepared bodies. Nice, nice. Okay, so yeah, I didn't prepare any like slides, but I was hoping to talk, give you a little bit of background on myself and then go through, 3 kind of areas that I feel are fairly important to maximizing your riding and your cycling. And then, if anybody has any questions, feel free to unmute yourself and, shout those out or put them in the chat if you want. Either is fine. Like I'll pick them up. So yeah, let's get started. So my background in cycling, I started out doing mountain biking actually before I did like all this road stuff. It just seemed like a fun thing to do. My older brother got a mountain bike, as a younger brother. I thought that was pretty cool. So I got one of my own, and shortly after I started to compete. After a couple years of that, I found out about road cycling. And as soon as I did that at a competition level, I was hooked on that, dropped the mountain bike, got, as serious as I could about road cycling, ended up, having some success that I was able to parlay like some results into like a professional contract, and basically just raced full time for over a decade. So that was a great accomplishment for me, because my big goal when I started was I wanted to be someone to pay me to ride my bike. I thought that would be amazing if I could race professionally and make a living at that, and I was able to do that. So that's a pretty something I'm fairly proud of. Competing is different than just going for a 100K ride, but a lot of the same principles apply. That it does take work. You do want to optimize your time on the bike and your nutrition and all these kind of things. So I'm going to go into that a little bit, and I kind of settled on 3 areas that I thought were pretty key. The first being comfort. So as I'm sure as you're all well aware, if you get on your bike every time and your feet hurt or your hands hurt or your back hurts or you're just not enjoying it, you're not going to do it as much. You're not going to get out as much as you'd want to, and then you're not going to, get the most out of it. So being comfortable on your bike is super important. And it's, like that could be getting a bike fit. That's kind of the obvious thing that a lot of people think about, is going to get a bike fit and making sure that the bike they're riding is, suitable for their dimensions and body. So that's one way to go about it. The other way is to tackle it from the side of your body, right? So you want your bike to fit, but you also want your body to be optimal and be working well, so that, even if your bike fit is perfect, if your, left leg is, a big imbalance compared to your right leg, it's tighter, it's weaker, you're going to be like shifting all over the bike and trying to compensate. So that's something a lot of people don't necessarily think about as much. But if you have access to good healthcare professionals and you're able to look at that side of things as well, along with the bike, that would be like my biggest thing there, is like look at the bike, but also look at the body, make sure that your body's functioning well, and then, you'll feel good on your bike as well. And then from there, maybe look at smaller things, right? Like, okay, do I, need a different saddle, or, different fitting shoes, or things like that, smaller things that maybe will make incremental benefits, but, take care of those big things first, getting the bike set up right, and then making sure your body's working well. So that was a huge thing for me. I rode bikes for probably 10 years before I had a second look from a bike fitter, an experienced bike fitter, and he actually made some fairly big changes. And I was quite surprised how much difference it made. He said, like, wow, like you're really sitting forward on the saddle. Let's lower it, which felt really weird. We're going to move it forward, so you're sitting back further and you're well supported on the saddle, right? Instead of sitting on this narrow part, let's sit on the meat of it where you should be, and you have this great platform to push off of. And it seems obvious, but I'd never really done it. And that year was one of my best years ever. I was more comfortable on my bike. I was able to get more power out, and it was a big game changer for me. So that's a big one right there. The second thing I would say is consistency. So comfort and then consistency, which, is again, kind of an obvious one. The more you ride, the better, things will be. But in an endurance sport like cycling, consistency is huge, right? Year over year, just being on your bike as much as you can, not missing huge chunks of time. That's a big factor in your development as a rider, but also just not losing fitness, not falling back, not going one step forward, two steps back all the time. So that's a big one. If you can somehow, figure out a way to regularly get on your bike or do some other form of exercise. It doesn't have to be riding. If you've got, 30 minutes during the weekend, it's not enough time to get out for a ride, do something else with that time and at least, maintain your fitness. We've got a question right now, so I'm just going to take it because it's relevant to the fitting area that we just talked about. Do your hands ever go numb from pressure on the handlebars, and what do you suggest to alleviate this? Which, is a common sort of thing that people deal with is, their wrists or their hands, things like that, have issues there. I would start with looking at how much pressure is on your hands, right? So you want to kind of a balance between weight on your butt and weight on your hands. If a lot of weight is on your hands and you're riding, too much pressure there, that's where you could have, blood flow issues and your hands start to go numb, things like that. So first look at that you've got a good weight distribution between, your saddle and your handlebars. And if you can, strive for like a good rule of thumb would maybe be 60-40, right? So the majority of your weight is slightly more on your butt, and then, the rest of it is on your hands. Okay. That's rule of thumb. It's not, perfect, but it's a good way to think about it. And then other thing would be like wrist angle. So a lot of people maybe are riding with like their wrists really bent one way or the other. I don't know if you can see. So like a nice straight wrist angle if you can, and then your kind of elbows would be like sort of bending to absorb shock and things like that. But you don't want your wrist, to be really dramatically bent, one way or the other. So like think about the wrist angle and how you're holding your handlebars. That would be the two things I would start with. It would maybe make the most difference. Gloves might help depending on the, the design of the glove. It's a third thing to maybe look at, but I wouldn't start with that. But yeah, think about weight distribution, and the wrist angle would be the first two things I would think about there. So hopefully that helps. So yeah, back to the consistency part. And then, so consistency is important. Figure out a way to work it into your schedule, and maybe even think about why do you want to get on the bike? You might have this target, this ride at the end of August, it's 100K. That's a good motivator for sure, but you're not always going to have that in the, near future. So, what else motivates you to get on your bike? For a lot of people, it may be just health. They just want to stay in shape. It could be you like to ride with others. It could be, you like that social element. It could be that you just like to clear your head and get out in the fresh air and, decompress after a long day of work. That's a big one for some people. So yeah, figure out why you like to ride and, use that to help you build some consistency into your routine. Or just like integrate it somehow. Like if you've got a group that you like to ride with, use each other's influence or like others to, get you out there and have that accountability, to meet the group and get it on the bike. It's a good way to get that into your routine. I found for me, like consistency, I was able to do it for many, many years by finding a way that, that I wasn't beating myself up over missing a day. That was a big thing for me. I know a lot of people, when it's your full-time job, you feel guilty if you miss a day or you cut, you don't do your 5-hour ride, you do a 1-hour ride because you're too tired or you're not motivated. So I never beat myself up over missing a training ride, or I wouldn't hesitate to cut a ride out of my training program if I really felt like I wasn't motivated and ready to tackle it. And I think that helped me like stay, have some good longevity because I wasn't burnt out, after 4 or 5 months of hard training. I could adjust my schedule enough that I could take those mini breaks and keep on it, not lose too much fitness, but still, have a break so I wasn't, dreading getting onto the bike. So that's a huge thing for me, or I think in general, just to stay consistent on the bike. So we have a question from Hershey. What would you suggest to drink and eat on the bike? Is that the question? Sorry.
Breathe. Didn't I? But breathe. Eat. Like, how would you suggest to breathe, and to when to breathe? Like, how to breathe, when to drink, when to eat.
Right. Yeah. So I mean, breathing. I mean, just being conscious, I guess, of your breath is not a bad idea. That you're breathing into your stomach or your belly and not in your chest. You're getting like a deeper breath. I think sometimes we consciously, carry tension and end up breathing shallow. So yeah, just I guess thinking to your breath that you're breathing deeply and you're relaxed, I guess, and getting in like, good deep breaths and lots of oxygen into your body. That's a good one for sure. And then eating and drinking on the bike. So that's going to be like tailored around the length of the ride and the difficulty of the ride, right? So if you're just going out for an easy ride, it might not be such a big deal to, have to eat anything. You don't have to really drink any calories or anything like that. I would say, if you're going out for longer rides, 2-3 hours, or you're going really hard, then I would start with, foods that you like to eat, just things that you're going to get in your body, so you have at least something as a basis. And then if that's working out for you, then you can try and optimize a bit more with certain foods. But generally, like I know there's a lot of rules of thumb and things that people like to go off of, a certain number of carbs and things like that. I'm more of a fan of like trial and error, like trying things out that work for you. Like I know some people that don't like sweet things. They don't like to eat, bars and gels and drink mixes and things like that. And they end up just bringing like beef jerky and trail mix or something because they like a savory food. So if you find that that's something you're gravitating towards, do that, like it's better than nothing. So yeah, I would say that the eating and drinking is a personal choice. And also should be catered around the ride. So if you're doing a longer ride, it's not going to hurt you to have some protein and fat in there. But if you're doing a 1 hour very hard ride, you maybe want to gravitate towards, the carbs and things that are easily digestible and aren't going to sit in your stomach as long. That's generally how I would approach that. So let's see, what else do we got? Yes, the consistency, just figuring out a way to get that work in and get it done. That's going to be probably the biggest thing you can do. Everything counts, but yeah, if you can get on the bike consistently, 2, 3, maybe 4 times a week, even that's gonna take you far. And then just as we talked about, like about the nutrition, my final kind of area that I wanted to go over was like customization. So I was kind of thinking comfort, consistency, customization. So CCC, or 3 C's. And by customization, I just mean like it's all personal, right? So what works for you might not work for someone else. And don't be afraid to experiment and try other ways of getting the result you want. I think there's not really much to lose. So engage in some trial and error and see what works for you, instead of just saying like, oh, the best practice is to do X, Y, and Z. But X, Y, and Z might not work for your, your personal life or your physiology or where you live or whatever, right? So, play around with what you're doing and see what works for you. I think like we kind of underestimate that element, or we just want to be told what to do. But in my career, I was a fan of like, tinkering around and trying new things, because sometimes you stumble upon something that really works for you, and it might not be what everyone else is doing, but it doesn't mean it's not a good idea. So on that side of things, play around with it. Do figure out systems, I guess, maybe that work for your schedule, things like that. I don't know, like I would say for me, like I would do a lot of rides that were long endurance type rides, but not very hard. And, you know, a lot of people would say, well, like, how do you race when all your rides are kind of, you know, quote unquote easy? But I found that like a short, really hard ride for me was very mentally taxing. Like to go out and push myself really, really hard by myself would really fatigue me and would, you know, be more detrimental than beneficial. So, you know, I do a lot of long endurance rides and I build up that fitness to a very high level. And then I would try and do training races, you know, like things where I wanted to get that high intensity. I would find out, you know, who can I go ride with that can really push me and hammer with me. So I don't have that, you know, hard, intense ride to do by myself. I can do it with others. You know, I get the same benefit, but it doesn't seem as hard as if I did it by myself. But I like to do the long rides by myself because then I could really control the intensity and get the optimal kind of workload done that I wanted to. So that was one area where and a lot of people are the opposite. They like to do the hard specific rides by themselves and the longer endurance rides with groups, because then it's like, you know, it's social, you get to chat with people, you get to stop and have a snack, things like that. So, you know, I just kind of flipped it around and said, you know what, this works better for me. So I'm going to do that. Yeah, I hope that makes sense to people. Yeah, and I know that's kind of all I wanted to go over were those three areas. I think those are, you know, three things to really think about. I didn't want to add too many things or overload people with information. You know, there's tons of resources online for people to look further into that sort of thing. But, you know, if you're talking about big picture things to think about for your own riding, you know, be comfortable on your bike, get out on your bike as much as you can, or some other form of exercise. Your body, you know, doesn't necessarily know the difference. It all counts. It's all good for you. And, you know, make it personal, make it suitable for you. It doesn't have to fit, you know, into some box or something like that. It can be whatever works for you. You know, if you find that getting up at 5 a.m. to go ride, you know, works for you, great. If not, you know, you like to get it done in the evening, do it in the evening, whatever, you know, suits your life. So those were kind of the things I was thinking about. And then I guess we did have some questions prior that were sent in. So have a look at those. Pre-ride meals. There was a question about pre-ride meals. So yeah. So on that front, I would say we've got a couple ways to tackle it. We kind of talked about food on the bike, and pre-ride is kind of similar. I'd say there's two ways to do it. One is, you know, if you're doing, like, let's just use this ride as an example, like a 100K ride where you definitely, you know, are burning some calories and you want to fuel properly, and it's starting in the morning. So let's use that as an example. I would say you can either, you know, get up early, eat a good breakfast with, you know, a bunch of calories, whatever you like. It could be something simple like yogurt, fruit, you know, granola, something like that, or it could be more substantial like eggs and you know, things like that, something that you want to cook up and fill your stomach with. So it's, you know, you have a feeling of being satiated for a long time. I typically, like if I was doing a hard race, I would actually eat a big meal the night before. And that would kind of serve to fuel my tank, as if you will, to have most of the energy I was going to use in the event. And then the morning of, I would just have a smaller meal just so my stomach didn't feel like super empty. And I wasn't going to feel like, you know, I really need to eat something, but I would just have a smaller meal in the morning and let that digest and do the race, because I like I don't want to feel like bloated or full on the bike. I want to be like light and kind of like energetic. So I like to eat the calories before, you know, they're still going to be in your system. You're still going to store them for energy to use later. And then, you know, you don't have to worry about, you know, digesting my food in time for the event, you know, by eating a big breakfast in the morning. And then Leah has just been in the chat, what kind of meal the night before? Yeah, I think like night before, and you also have more flexibility when you do it the night before, you know, if there's something that you really like to have. You know, I would just say make sure you have a good mix of everything. You know, you want some nutrients, you know, eat your veggies, always good advice, and then have some carbs in there. Again, whatever you kind of like, you know, if it's potatoes, pasta, rice, you know, anything that sits well in your stomach and you seem to tolerate well, you know. Meals, I think meals should be enjoyed, you know, so don't eat things that you're just going to be like stuffing it in your mouth and being like, oh, I got to eat this, you know, like eat something you enjoy. and yeah, and have some protein in there, right? And if you can, eat it with some people you like, and kill two birds with one stone. So yeah, I'm flexible. I don't like this, like, you should eat X, Y, and Z, or this many carbs and this many protein. Like, if it's going to be a hard, challenging ride for you, definitely get enough carbs, which is going to be, like your pasta and your rice and potatoes, bread, things like that. Also veggies, but veggies tend to be a bit more calorically, not dense, the opposite of dense, whatever that would be. But yeah, eat a balanced meals, and then in the morning, eat something that you know is not going to upset your stomach. So it could be something small. It could be banana and a bagel or something, and maybe some coffee if you like coffee. I definitely do. So yeah, I think that's pretty good. Unless anyone else wanted to expand on that more.
I think Ellie Shoker had a question.
Sure.
Ellie?
Hi, can you talk a little bit about zone training, and if it's too late to start using zone training for this kind of ride, talking about the 100K ride?
Yeah, good question. Yeah. So
excuse me, maybe you can just explain to some people, maybe people don't know what zone riding is.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and are you referring to heart rate based zones or power based zones?
Heart rate based zones.
Heart rate based zones. Okay. So yeah, so the overall idea there is, our heartbeat range is, sort of finite, right? Like it could be between, let's say, 50 and 200 for almost the majority of the population, right? So, your resting heart rate, if you're really fit, it might be 50. I mean, some will be even lower, even in the 40s, but let's just say, for argument's sake, that most people's resting heart rate is going to be between 50 and 70. And then when you're obviously going as hard as you possibly can, there's kind of a maximum heart rate you're going to hit. And that's kind of dependent on age, but it's also like a personal thing. Some people are going to have little hummingbird hearts that, they can ride all day at 160 or something. And that might be a max heart rate for someone else. So your heart rate zones are definitely personal based off your age and also physiology. But the idea with the heart rate zones is that they're a guide for your training. So, you might say there's 5 heart rate zones. So like zone 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And zone 1 and 2 typically would be lower intensity or easier, right? So if you're going for just like an hour, super easy cruise, maybe on the bike path or something like that, that would be like considered zone 1 training, right? Or like an easy recovery ride. Zone 2 training would be more like your endurance ride. So like if you're doing like a long, whatever long ride is for you, maybe it's 2 hours, 3 hours, 5 hours, I don't know. It's something you can do for a long time. It's still work. It still takes effort, but it's sustainable for a long period of time. That would generally be considered zone 2. Okay. And then zone 3 is kind of like kind of a middle zone, right? So, like I would say like an elite marathon runner is probably in like zone 3 for a lot of their race. So it's kind of like it's a hard pace, but it's still sustainable for, an hour, maybe 2, even up to 3. If you're really fit. So that's kind of zone 3, or like tempo, some people call it. So, that's a good zone if you're kind of time crunched, like say you're trying to train for a 100K ride, but you really can't often get out for more than say an hour, maybe an hour and a half at a time. If you can try and spend time in that zone 3, where it's harder than you're actually going to be doing the 100K ride at, but it's still like stressing the right system. That's a good, zone for that kind of thing. And then zone 4 typically is like what a lot of people will call like their threshold, or it has a bunch of different names: anaerobic threshold, functional threshold, things like that. And that's really like the most common definition is the maximal effort you can sustain for an hour, right? So it's kind of like your max endurance. It's still an endurance zone, it's still an aerobic workout, but you can't push that pace for more than like an hour at the most. So that would be like kind of zone 4. And then zone 5 or even zone 6 is basically anything over that. Like once you're over your threshold, the stimulus on your body and the adaptations you're getting changes, because you're kind of tapping into different energy systems, and burning different fuels and things like that. So it really changes when you kind of cross that threshold. So anything above that could be considered zone 5. And then, I guess some people will consider like a zone 6 as well, which is basically just like a sprint, almost like something you can do for 10 seconds, right? So like you just sprint, to make a red light or something, and you're just going as hard as you can for, 8-10 seconds. That could be considered zone 6. That would be like a brief overview. I hope that makes sense. And then in terms of utilizing those zones, I guess when you kind of have to figure out what they are for you. So commonly people will use like a percentage of max heart rate. So if you knew what your max heart rate was, like say you roughly knew that last time you sprinted up a hill for 2 minutes as hard as you could, and you thought you were going to throw up at the end, and you had a heart rate point, let's say it's hypothetically 180, let's say it's 180, you could then, go online and look at percentage zones. So you might say zone 1 is, from 40% to 60% of the max heart rate. So that's kind of how you would determine the zones. And then your training would be designed around them. So, your workout on Tuesday is going to be 3 by 10 minutes in zone 3. You want to get some of that effort in, but it's still going to be a workout that, the next day you're not exhausted. You can do some more training sort of thing. So that could be like a way to implement it. And then on Saturday, you're going to do, zone 5, intervals up a climb that's close to you. And you're going to do 4 times 4 minutes or something like that. So that's how you would implement it. And then there's just tons of nuance about how you could design a training program around those zones. I don't know if anybody wants to go deeper into that. I mean, it could be something that I could even have like a one-on-one on if somebody was interested in that. But that's kind of like the basic overview of training zones.
Great, they're very helpful. Thank you.
No problem. So yeah, training zones, and then we had pre and post ride stretches. There was a question submitted earlier about that. So I actually watched the YouTube video of Miriam's meeting. Webinar, I don't know, again, I'm calling this, but yeah, Miriam did a great job. I think she talked about like post-ride activation, which is a little bit different than stretching, right? So activation really is like turning on your muscle so it's ready to do the exercise or ready to do the movement you're trying to do. So I am in sync with her thoughts on that. Is like pre-ride, you want to try and do activation, get your muscles ready to do the activity or the ride. I don't know if she sent along some examples of that, but you could either search, muscle activation exercises, and I would focus on glutes would be a big one, getting your glutes ready to move, because those are important muscles when you ride, because like your glutes really, they're a big muscle, they're strong. So you really want to tap into those to push the pedals over. And they also like help with your knee tracking. So if you ever had knee pain, sometimes that can be, linked back to your glutes not working properly. So getting, some activation, 2 or 3 maybe key activation exercises you could probably do in 5 minutes is what I would say pre-ride. And then post-ride, if you wanted to implement some, some stretching, I would say look at your psoas or your hip flexors, like the front of your kind of quad area, because on a bike, we're basically in a sitting position, and a lot of us sit, all day already, right, at a job, right, like maybe in an office or now at home. So if we're already sitting all day and having our psoas, our hip flexor, in a short position, and then we're riding and still in a short position, we want to lengthen it out and give it some some love, right? So stretch the psoas. I'll send Leah a link. There's one actually, like a couple of videos that I really like with stretches for that. It's a very like deliberate and sort of thoughtful way to do it, instead of just like kind of hanging out and like, looking at your phone and not really thinking about, oh, I'm stretching. It doesn't hurt to do that, but like it is more impactful to do it deliberately and with some thought. So I'll send her the link for that, which is a good one. And then aside from that, I would maybe say, like anything that is bugging you, right? Because it's going to be personal again, right? Because some people might get really tight hamstrings, other people might get really tight quads. So just like pay attention to your body and what it's telling you. And if you're finding that one area is tighter than another, then stretch that, because you might not need to stretch your hamstrings. You might have really flexible hamstrings already, and stretching them more isn't really changing anything. So think about what might be tight and work on that. And that goes back to that customization, right? Or that personal element, you know, because everyone's different. We all have different needs. You know, I found that, yeah, I would like, for me, like I just said, like I would like stretch my hamstrings because they were actually not too bad on the flexibility front, but the front of my body, you know, my quads and my psoas and stuff, those would get tight. So yeah, think about it like that, and find some things that work for you. There's tons of resources, you know, available for those kind of things. So yeah, so stretches, activation, and then the other question that came in earlier was about transitioning from a hybrid bike to a road bike. I don't know if the person that asked the question is on the call, but they're wondering if there's any tips about transitioning from, I guess their current bike is maybe more of a hybrid or like a more of a relaxed, you know, fit, to a road bike, which I guess would be like obviously a bit more aggressive, and you know, you're going to go faster. That's the nice thing about road bike. So on that, my thinking for bike, you know, is really like, where are you actually riding? You know, like if you're actually just riding on pavement all day, every time, then sure, go ahead and switch to a road bike. But if you're going like off-road a little bit, or maybe you're riding on some trails, or you like the comfort element of the hybrid, you know, it's probably going to be a bit more relaxed fit, then stick with the hybrid. But if you want to go faster and you're finding you're just riding on the road all the time anyways, you know, and you want to make the switch to a road bike, I would say go ahead and do that, because you're probably not going to miss out on any of the sort of losses, I guess, from leaving the hybrid behind. And then also in that same question was around adding in like the pedals that you clip into, right? So where you have like a cleat on your shoe and you kind of clip into the pedal, and you know, that obviously helps with producing power and also comfort, because the sole of those shoes is going to be stiffer. You know, your foot's going to feel a bit more comfortable in that on longer rides. So yeah, so clipping in as a newbie is kind of intimidating. You know, it's a foreign thing. You know, you're like, oh, I'm kind of stuck on this cleat. You know, how do I get out? I'm worried about falling, that sort of thing. So tips. You know, I learned it so long ago. I'm probably a bad resource for this, but the problem is you're probably going to fall no matter what. You know, you're going to come to somewhere and you kind of lean left, and you want to unclip with your left foot. You lean to the right, and you can't get out in time, and you kind of topple over, and it's, you know, super embarrassing. I think just practice and kind of thinking about it in advance. So if you know you're going to have to gun clip out, just be like really, aggressive, but like really think about it in advance. You know, unclip, be well in advance when you need to. You know, lean over to whatever side you're going to unclip into, and you know, you'll get used to it. The other thing you can do is most pedals have a setting. You can adjust how tight it is, so you can start out with it really loose. So when you go to unclip, get out of the pedal, it's a very light action to do that, right? And as you get more experience, you might want to tighten that up, so it takes a bit more effort to get out, but you feel a bit more secure when you are clipped in. So most pedals have that adjustability, so you can just start out with it a bit easier, so you're not worried about being able to unclip. You're not like standing there like, you know, really trying to get your foot out. And then as you get more comfortable, you can tighten it up and go from there. So that's kind of what I would say on the clipless pedal front. Gene has a question. What would you recommend, if anything, to someone riding both hybrid bike with flat pedals and road bike 50/50? Okay. Yeah, if you're kind of doing a bit of both, and I guess, are you switching back and forth? I mean, I guess in terms of like, if we're still framing in terms of like the ride and stuff, and you plan on riding the road bike and the clipless, I would say just spend more time on the bike you're going to be using, you know, for the event. Don't, you know, if you can, you know, put more time on that bike so you're more familiar with it when the day comes for the ride. But if you're going back and forth on a regular basis, I guess, yeah, it's a tough one. I mean, just spend time on the one that you're least comfortable with until that transition back and forth is normalized, you know? So it's not like you're not really worried about going on one bike or the other, and it's just kind of an easy thing. So it's kind of just consistency and practice, getting used to going back and forth, you know, like some guys ride, mountain bikes and track bikes and road bikes and, 4 or 5 different disciplines. And I think it's the same kind of idea. They can just get used to switching from one type of bike to another by doing it a lot. So no magic, answers there. Just you got to just do it, I think, and get used to the switch back and forth. I think we went through all the questions that were sent in. Is there anything else that I missed or someone else wanted to ask? Eugene says, thanks, you're most welcome. Stretches on a long ride. Okay. Yeah, so yeah, I think like it's going to depend on what's bugging you. Like if you find you go out for a longer ride and after, maybe you get 40, 50, 60% in and your, back starts to hurt or your neck starts to hurt or something, there could be ways to, I would tackle it from 2 ways, like you could stretch it on the ride and kind of try and give some like short-term alleviation to that pain or discomfort. And then also tackle it from a preventative standpoint. So, if your back is bugging you, like, is it because your hamstrings are tight, or is it because your back's weak, or is it because your bike fits, too aggressive? So tackle it from a preventative side and kind of see what's maybe going on there. And then, if it does come up on a ride, you can always stop and stretch. If you're talking about on the bike, that's a bit trickier. If you're assuming you're comfortable, you can always, maybe take one pedal off or one foot off the pedal and do like a quad stretch kind of thing, or even just standing up sometimes a bit more frequently and giving your back, a break, stand up and give that a bit of a flex, the opposite direction that it's kind of being in. Yeah, that's kind of a personal one. I would say like figure out what's bugging you and hit it on all fronts so you can, hopefully it's not an issue, later on. Okay. I think that's all the ones that were in the chat. Did I miss any, Leah? Or
no? One of the things I just wanted to bring out is that people always come to a ride without having their bikes checked. I mean, that's the biggest thing, especially with the tires. People like maybe suggest, just as far as a layman's term of when they take their bike out, what could they be feeling when they touch their tires? Should it be a little soft, a little softer, harder? Well, in your opinion, where do you think it should be? I know it's written like all of the tires, excuse me, all have the PSI on their yep. tires, but just through a layman's term.
Yeah. So yeah, obviously you can overinflate and you can underinflate. And on the underinflation side, you don't want to be so low that if you hit, say you're rolling to a parking lot and there's a little lip, you don't want to hit something like that and it, pinches your tube and you get a flat tire, right? So you want to be enough air that you're not getting like that pinch flat thing where you hit a pothole or something and your tube is going to pinch and it's going to puncture the tube and you're going to flat. That sucks, right? Nobody likes that. And then the opposite on the spectrum, you don't want to overinflate so that when you hit that same bump, it just is super jarring, right? Like there's no forgiveness, your tire's not absorbing any of that shock. So yeah, like the guide on the side of the tire is a good starting point. And then depending on your weight and your riding style and what kind of terrain you're riding, you can kind of like work within that as a range. So if you find you're riding on nice, hard pavement most of the time, you can maybe go at the upper end of it. If you're finding that you're riding on rougher roads and you're maybe a little bit of a lighter rider, then you can go on the lower end of it, right? Because weight is also a factor on that as well. So heavier riders are maybe more prone to having those flats, so they want to have a bit more pressure, right? So if you're looking at 80 to 100, maybe in a road bike, go with 100 to start and see how that feels. And if you feel like it is kind of jarring and a little bit uncomfortable, let a little bit out, maybe go down to 90 and see if that's better. So yeah, it's a little bit trial and error. And I would also say it depends on the tire itself. I guess like wider tires, you can sometimes get away with lowering running a lower pressure, right? So if you have a wider tire, like maybe on a road bike, it would maybe be like a 28 millimeter or like wide, or like a 32 even, you know, you can maybe go with a lower pressure, which has been more of a trend over the last few years. But if your tire is narrower, like let's take a 25, you know, you maybe want to go with a bit higher pressure because that's more optimal for that width.
Looks like Shimmy has a question.
Upgrade on the bike. Yeah, good question for sure.
Yeah, I guess that's my question in the chat. Perfect, thanks.
Yeah, stay on for a second because I want to ask what are you optimizing for, right? So like, what kind of upgrades are going to make the most difference for you? Like if you're trying to go as fast as possible, I would say get fast wheels, right? Like that's going to make the biggest difference. Get some aerodynamic wheels because that's going to help you go faster. But maybe you don't care about going fast. So yeah, maybe tell a little bit about what kind of riding you're doing or what you're trying to achieve.
I don't know. I like cycling. I'm not doing any racing, but like just, you know, best return on investment. Like I recently got shoes and clipless pedals, but yeah, like it's an older bike and I'm just curious like what the ideal thing is to what would be the best return on investment with a very limited budget.
Yeah, so that's a good one. Like the shoes and pedals is a good one. If you're trying to increase your, you know, performance, I guess, like you're trying to get faster on the bike and feel stronger and things like that, you know, I would say time riding is going to be the biggest one. It's probably nothing on your bike, but yeah, if you're looking at the bike itself and you want to go faster, I think wheels and I would even say like maybe you'd invest in, you know, like a heart rate monitor or a power meter or something, so you're able to quantify your training better. Like if you're serious about your training and you want to really like tackle that from a more structured standpoint, you know, having some way to measure some data and some feedback, you know, that's a good one. You know, heart rate or power is the typical ways there. And then yeah, with the bike itself, I would say wheels, and maybe even like your if you're doing a competition, your clothing. So you want to make sure that that's like good, you know, aerodynamic, you know, properly fitting clothing, because your body is the main source of drag on the bike, right? So if you're able to get in a more aerodynamic position and have, you know, aerodynamic clothing, those would be the two biggest things to help you go faster. You know, things like carbon handlebars are expensive, you know, and aren't really going to make that much difference in the grand scheme of things compared to those other things we just mentioned about. So I would avoid things like that, like, you know, seat posts and handlebars. You know, you can maybe get a lighter, you know, crank set or something like that. Those are small gains that I would reserve for the very end, you know, once you've optimized around your training and, you know, those bigger elements.
Thanks so much. I really appreciate the advice.
Yeah, no
I
problem.
wanted to know if wide tires are just as efficient as the narrow tires on the road bike.
Oh, cut out a bit.
If the narrow tires and the wide tires are just as efficient, or are the wider tires on a road narrow tires?
Yeah, so I think I got most of that, but I think it sounded like you were asking whether or not, I guess at some point there's probably a tipping point where going wider is slower in terms of tire width. So, you know, for most road racing, like so if you watch the Tour de France or something like that, I would say the majority of the field is riding on a tire that's probably 25 to 28 millimeters wide. That would be like the most common. Whereas, you know, a decade ago, it was probably more like 23. I guess like, you know, technology has changed and research to that has changed. And, you know, the increased width isn't slowing them down. And in fact, it's helping them corner better because they have more contact with the road, right? The wider tire with the slightly lower pressure, you're getting more rubber on the road, which is good for handling, good for cornering. So yeah, if you're doing mostly road riding and you want to optimize, you know, for speed, then I would say stick in that 25 to 27, 28 millimeter range. if you're riding a bit more like, mixed terrain, maybe some gravel or dirt roads, things like that, then you can go, and you're thinking more about comfort and traction and things like that. And that's where you maybe want to go with a wider tire. But I don't know if that answered the question. Feel free to shout at me if I missed a point there.
That's fine. I just thought that a wider tire is much stabler than a narrow tire. And as far as speed goes, I don't think it's going to make any.
Yeah. I think there was like maybe a bit of a myth around that the wider tires were slower, but it doesn't seem like that's been the case, in more recent years. I guess still, like if in a very narrow use case, like say track cycling, where they're on like a super smooth velodrome, there's no bumps, they don't have to worry about cornering or traction because they're on a banking, that's where they're using like still a narrower tire with a super high pressure. That's such a small use case that for most people that's just not practical. So yeah, I think, and like manufacturers are mostly now speccing like a wider tire as well, just because that's working for more people and most of the riding they do.
Okay, anybody have any more questions? All right. Well, I think we can, if we don't have any more questions, I think it could be wrapped up. And I want to thank all of you for participating, and I want to thank you, Ryan, for coming out. I know you have a heck of a schedule on, and we look forward to meeting you in person.
Yeah, it'd be great.
One day. So, and if anybody has any questions that they want to shoot to Ryan, by all means, just reach out to Leah, and then she'll be able to forward that to Ryan, and Ryan, I'm sure, will be very, very happy to answer any questions. So on behalf of everybody, we thank you all, and we thank Leah for doing all this. And I want to thank Andrew for setting this up. And we can't do it without you. So if anybody knows any more riders out there, we need some more, and we need more money. So it's a great cause. Okay. Thank you very much, all. Have a good night. Thank you. Okay.
Thanks, everyone. Yeah, have a great night.
Thanks. God bless. Stay safe.